Bonsoir et soyez bienvenue. So we get to meet a author for the first time tonight. I'm really delighted to present Timothy Schaffert to you. And this is his wonderful book, The Perfume Thief, which is set in Paris in 1941, hence my sort of fractured French introduction. But Timothy is the author of 5 previous novels: The Swan Gondola, Coffins of Little Hope, Devils in the Sugar Shop, Singing and Dancing Daughters of God, and The Phantom Lives of the Rollo Sisters. Unsurprisingly, I will continue to say he's a professor of English and director of creative writing at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He also writes a column called The Eccentricities of Gentlemen. So my bet is, Timothy, that you didn't really see yourself as a crime novelist when you wrote this book.
You're right. I didn't. I had the character in mind, and I wanted to involve her in a plot, and then the sort of, but she's a criminal, and crime follows her, and she follows crime. So, it's, by default, it's a crime novel.
Well, historical fiction, I mean, there's always somebody who dies, and the only question is, or is up to no good. Did they die on purpose? Was it just, accident, suicide? Was it really a mystery at all? So crime fiction is a hugely enveloping and very broad genre, very broad umbrella. So I will say this is our historical fiction book of the month. And Timothy has kindly autographed copies for us, which are somewhere between Lincoln, Nebraska and Scottsdale, Arizona. Should be in actually tomorrow. And we have a few unclaimed autographed copies. So if you are so moved, I would grab one while you can. Patrick, who is monitoring our Facebook comments field, will put the buy link for the book into the comments field, so you can just click on it, buy a copy. How about that? So that wasn't available, that technology, in 1941, was it?
It was not.
So what interested you? I mean, it's such a terrible moment in history, but also, absolute gold for a writer. What drew you to Paris, 1941?
Well, I was thinking about her life of crime, really. And so I had the concept of a perfume thief before I had anything else. And so I was writing some other book, and it was the 1920s, and there was a party of notorious people, and I was just kind of describing the people who showed up. And eventually the perfume thief showed up. And so I didn't really know what that was, or it was just I don't know exactly where it came from. But then I wrote a few lines about her, and then moved on with the party. And then she just kind of lingered in my imagination. And I eventually abandoned that book and decided to try to figure out what a perfume thief would thieve, and how she would make a living that way, and how she would, in what ways might that be lucrative, and what ways might that make sense. And so as I thought more and more about those possibilities, the novel started to put itself together. And I didn't really know what I wanted it to be. So I was thinking about the various moments in her life that I might focus on. And so in plotting that all out, I kind of figured out, I decided she was going to be born 100 years before I was born to the day. And so in thinking about that put her at the age of 72 in 1941. And I guess I thought, well, it would be interesting to think about a perfume thief or a perfumer in Paris in 1941 during the occupation. And once I figured that out, I thought, well, that's a novel in and of itself. That can't just be part of the book. That's going to require a fair amount of attention. And then just the machinery of the plot started coming into play.
You toss off the term perfume thief so casually. What is a perfume thief? I mean, I think it's a wonderful title for a book. It really drew me in, just seeing the title. But what is it that a perfume thief might be?
Well, when I first came up with it, I had no idea, and I didn't know if it was even a thing or who would do such a thing. And then I did a little bit of research and didn't find my way any further deeper into it. It wasn't until after I finished the book and was asked these questions about what is a perfume thief and what is the historical relevance that I looked into it a little more closely. And it seems it was a kind of popular, remains to this day, a popular headline title. It's like people who, for anybody who steals a bottle of perfume from a drugstore, to somebody who might hijack an entire truckload of perfume that then they peddle to the secondary market. And so I spent a little time just going through newspapers.com and various other newspaper archives and typing in Perfume Thief. And so journalists had a lot of fun with that, because you can talk about, oh, they're on the scent of the perfume thief, or the perfume thief stinks, or all kinds of play on words that but yeah, I found everything from an 18-year-old girl named Florence Price in New York City in the 1920s, who snuck into the neighbor's apartment and stole a bunch of expensive perfume and then got caught emanating it, wearing it in the street and bragging about it, to heists, heists of truckloads in warehouses, because the perfume could be sold otherwise. And I found a gentleman in 1908 who went to the court before the judge to confess to being a perfume thief and saying, that's what I do. I've in my life, I've taken a lot of perfume because I can't afford it and I care about it. It's my passion. And he happened to be wearing the perfume that he was accused of stealing. So he was, he was found guilty of the crime. So it's not, and so we have like Google search set up for perfume thief, and you'll still get little newspaper articles about people who have around the world who, for one reason or another, steal perfume.
That's so interesting, because when I read the title, I had an entirely different idea of what a perfume, I mean, it drew me into the reading the book to see if I was right. But there was a very interesting set of mysteries. I'm not going to remember the author of the title. She was a librarian at the Library of Congress, where once I was a librarian at the Library of Congress. And so her books were presented to me as something we should sell. And much of the perfume industry, at least older perfume industry, was located around Grasse in France, because of the, the wonderful flowers that flourish in the south of France, lavender and on and on and on. And perfume thief didn't mean stealing the perfume as a commodity of value. What it meant was stealing the formula. It meant, stealing somebody else's recipe for perfume and passing. I mean, really. And so that's what I thought, when I first saw this. And I thought, now, how is that going to work in occupied Paris? So, I realized afterward that what I thought the perfume thing was going to be was clearly not what Timothy was writing. But I've always been intrigued by that, the idea of pirating the formulas, because, there's been over the years, less so today, I think, because with all the allergies and stuff people have, it's a lot less likely that, for example, you used to go into a department store and people, would like spray you and so forth, and they can't do that anymore because it sets off asthma and other things. But there used to be an enormous amount of mystery, so forth, about the launching of a new perfume. And, was it high-powered money campaign? They would bring in glamorous people. They would use, movie stars and stuff, to like represent the perfume. And there was a lot of money in it. So, either way, either whether you're stealing actual perfume to resell it, or if you're stealing a formula in order to make it, it's a commodity that has a lot of money attached to it. Right. So that would be why the industry was worthwhile, right?
Counterfeiting, the people who make a ton of money out of approximating the scent, because you can't really trademark the actual scent itself. And so people have sold for decades, scents that smell like something else, and they advertise it as such. And so, there's a variety of, and I tried to kind of explore all of that. And I actually decided to make Clementine, the title character. She dabbles in a little bit of everything ultimately. And so, and she also specializes in rare ingredients too. And so she sees some avenues of success in that way. She really ends up being a thief for hire to a certain degree too. So she has people, she takes advantage of people's sense of nostalgia or sense of status and all the various aspects that of owning something owning some particular scent, perhaps a rare scent or a scent that, or a perfume that might have belonged to somebody in history, and exploits that as well. But yeah, and the other thing is that in my research, I discovered that perfume is the main thing is the number one thing shoplifted by women, actually, perfume and cosmetics in that category. And Chanel #5 is in the top 10 of stolen perfumes. It's a few notches down from Axe body spray, actually.
Interesting. I still have a bottle that I bought in Paris, but the one I particularly like, and I'm sure it's gone off totally now, but when I was 15, I went to Europe, which is 1955, went to Europe with my grandmother, and we went, among other places, to the city of Cologne, or Köln, as the Germans will call it. And there's a famous Wasser, Kölnwasser, which is what, 4711 or something, I think was that. I'd have to go look because I still have the bottle, which has a beautiful image of the Dom, the big cathedral in Köln. And hence we get cologne, because it was this particular formula. And so the other thing I thought about, Timothy, was that perfume could be part of a person's identity, that there were women in particular, but also men, because there are certainly, it's called aftershave or whatever, but can be identified by scent. And that used to be an important part, I think, of a woman's wardrobe, was her particular scent.
Yeah. The perfumer Ernst Daltroff, who founded the House of Cologne, which is still manufacturing perfume today, he was very insightful into consumer trends and interests in women and men in terms of perfume, and so he, like, for example, in like 1919, he marketed Tabac Blonde, which was meant to capitalize on the interest in cigarette smoking among women and a new generation of women and empowerment and women taking on new habits and new fashions. And at the same time, a perfume that would meld and disguise and enhance and the smell of cigarette smoke. And so I think that there are the chemists, there are those who intuit what smells great, and then there are those also who then know how to package it. I mean, that the perfume can sometimes, the bottle itself can be as important as the perfume, and then the box itself and the marketing campaign. And so it takes a particular kind of business genius, I think, to really to make an iconic perfume.
Well, it takes chemistry. It takes great marketing, as you said. And I also find it interesting. I'm not a perfume wearer myself, but I find it interesting as to why a person would identify with a particular scent. What is it that your perception of yourself is that you would think that this perfume would be more you than another perfume? And there's stuff like musk and civet, all these other things that, because in order to make it a stable compound so it doesn't go off, there's just I mean, you go all the way back to the Borgias and their poison rings and other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And perfumes, and so like the house, I mean, I think the House of Cologne still manufactures Tabac Blonde and Narcisse Noir and perfumes that have been in production for decades. But I can't imagine that it smells the same as it did in 1919. I mean, I think that they reformulate it, and because they're also conscious of trends. I mean, I think even like I bought one of the perfume bottles in the book is inspired somewhat by the perfume Shocking by Schiaparelli, and it came in the shape of a woman's torso, or dressmaker's dummy, and or mannequin. And so, but that the perfume was kind of described as shocking. It was new, it was vital, it was dynamic, and you smell it now, or at least the versions, the old bottles that I've found of it, doesn't smell that shocking. It smells a little old-fashioned to me, maybe a little powdery, but I don't know for sure if that's the way it would have smelled when it was first bottled. And I also am not smelling it for the first time in 1930, you know, I saw it here all these years later. So it's a fascinating conceptual play as well.
Well, you know, we do say bottle. And in fact, since I'm a museum junkie, I have seen, you know, perfume unguents and perfume bottles from, you know, the Greeks and the Romans on up. And it's all glass, which I think is, you know, important because the glass doesn't interact chemically with the other compounds. And, you know, I had this discussion with an author not long ago. We were talking about it in my Stanford alumni magazine, and I'm told in the Smithsonian magazine or what, there's a woman who advertises pheromones as bottled as a way of like a dating app, you know, that she claims that you're you know, you can be sexually more attractive if you whatever this product is. I skim over, but I see it, and I have seen it for years in my alumni magazine. And as I said, somebody else said she advertises in the Smithsonian and so forth. So, you know, the sense of smell is so powerful. And years ago, when I was a baby editor, which I don't do full time anymore, but I used to do for a long time, John Sanford, with whom I'm having dinner in a little while, and is a great writer, I think, gave me some advice. And he said, you know, it's always important to engage all five senses in a novel. But the most important one, he said, and do it early, is smell. If you can introduce language, you know, something or other that creates a powerful sense of smell, of, you know, you will bring readers into your book. You know, it isn't just about seeing and hearing and all, but they need to smell it. And I think that's really true. Did you find when you were writing it that, you know, a sense of smell kind of, you know, was an important part of that creative process?
I did, and certainly, and it's tough. I mean, it's difficult to describe scent in a way that you hope to convey to the reader, because it's not like describing a scene, you know, a room or something with the lamps over here and the tables over here and the chairs red and all of that. I mean, that's easy enough to stir up images in a reader's head, even if they're not necessarily exactly the images you have in your own head. But scent, it's kind of like if you'd say, you know, the perfume smelled of roses. Well, does that actually evoke roses for the reader? And I think it would be a special reader who did immediately respond, you know, to olfactory references.
Well, you can really only describe it by analogy. I mean,
right.
You know, there's and as you say, you know, people's experience of roses is all going to be different. So, you know, it's elusive and yet powerful. And I think that elusiveness is so important. And did you think about Josephine Baker when you were writing Clementine? Because I mean, she seems kind of an obvious analog here.
Yeah, I thought a lot about Josephine Baker. And as a matter of fact, I talked about Josephine Baker too with my editor in the editing process. And then she asked me to do this research note. And originally I hadn't mentioned any research that I'd done into Josephine Baker. And she's like, well, where's Josephine Baker in your research note? And I'm like, well, because I feel like I've always kind of known about her. Like I didn't do specific research into Josephine Baker when I was writing this book. And so I feel like Josephine Baker to a certain extent informs the entirety of the book and my entire sense of Paris and my portrait of it. So yeah, I mean, she's a fascinating figure. And I don't really remember when I first knew about her. I mean, and so, but I feel like I have always known about her. I mean, she was certainly still alive when I was a kid, and I would have perhaps learned about her when she died, or I would have had some acknowledgement of her, or recognition of her death, perhaps. But it's yeah, she's definitely, her spirit is kind of hovering in that book, and she inspired all kinds of perfumers as well. I mean, there are any number of perfumers are claimed that theirs was her signature scent, you know, and she and the house that she had in France, she even designed a couple of the bathrooms after her favorite perfume bottles. So a bottle by Arpeg, I can't think of the exact.
Arpege, isn't it?
Arpege, yes.
Yeah.
Is patterned in the tiled with the black and gold in the bottle, and then I think I can't remember what the other perfume bottle that had a lot of pink in it, I guess. But
Was this her home in the
yeah.
Dordogne, or was it in Paris?
This was her chateau. So this
Yeah,
was,
it's in the Dordogne. There's an
yeah.
author named Martin Walker who writes one of our very favorite series, and it's set in the Dordogne.
Okay.
The first, you would absolutely love them. The first one's called Bruno, Chief of Police, but it goes on from there. But Josephine had a chateau on that whole stretch of the Dordogne, in which she took in orphans, and
Yes.
she played a very powerful. She's for those of you who don't know her, she's an American. Well, that's redundant. Sorry, she's an African American who, at the time she lived, could do better in France. She could be more her authentic self in France than she could in a segregated America. And so, that's where she was. And she really was just a remarkable woman. Martin writes about her in various times. And in fact, I spent 5 weeks in the Dordogne some years ago and visited the chateau and, been up and down the river in the little boats and all the rest of it. And I really admire her. It took a lot of courage for her to lead the life that she did. And, I was sad that, the money ran out. She didn't necessarily have a happy ending, but she was just amazing. So when this book is described, and I can quote from this, it says something about gender. She's gender fluid. What do you understand gender fluid to actually be? Is that a polite way of saying bisexual, or today with all the complicated I'm somewhat lost. I admit that I am still binary, I'm 80 years old, and when my world is either male or female.
Right.
But I had the pleasure of a roommate, a wonderful, very wonderful gay man who took me in when I was studying library science at a difficult time in my life, and we lived together for a couple of years, and it was a marvelous experience. I really loved him. He unfortunately died early of AIDS. He had a fairly flamboyant lifestyle in Didyman at a time when nobody really knew what AIDS was or what to do about it. And so it isn't as though I've led a totally binary existence. But I'm lost with gender fluid. So can you explain that to me?
Well, I think in this case, she was somebody who literally sometimes lived as a man and sometimes lived as a woman in terms of her identity. And so she's at one point in the book, because the bulk of the book is set in 1941 Paris, but there's also moments where she's reflecting on 1890s Manhattan, and those are the times when she's moved to Manhattan. She's in her late 20s, and she's just decided to live as a man, and so she takes on a man's name, and she's wearing a man's clothes, and she falls in with a society of people like her, people who also wear men's clothes, but are otherwise identified as women. And so she and she falls in love, and I think, and at one point she's asked, well, what is this? What are you doing? And who are you? And she's like, were you born? Do you think you were born a man, or do you what is your sense of yourself? And she's just kind of like, these aren't questions that are answerable. I mean, or they're the wrong questions, or there aren't right answers to any of this. It doesn't have anything to do with birth or gender. So I mean, so there's a lot of, I think Clementine is a character for whom gender just doesn't inform her decisions ultimately. I mean, she does, as the book is taking place, she's really living as a woman and thinking of herself as a woman. But she's also somebody that has literally tried on different hats in her life. So, but I was also kind of thinking of uh, Virginia Woolf's book Orlando, and so I liked the idea of taking that work of fantasy, which is really what it is, and like how it explores something like 300 years in a character's life of somebody who's sometimes a boy, sometimes a girl, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, and thinking of a kind of semi-realistic approximation of that, or as realistic as I can get in my own approach to writing, and apply a realistic lifeline and how she would navigate and negotiate those particularities of gender. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Well, I guess what puzzles me is that I understand gender fluidity means that you can, dress as a man, behave as a man or a woman. I mean, back when I was a French major, we read Chaudelot de Laclos, Les Liaisons Dangereuses, and, the fashions in 18th century France meant that you could be a boy or a girl and dress up like the other, and nobody could tell. I mean, girls could pass as boys because of the fashions, and boys could pass as girls. But is that different than being bisexual? That's where I'm trying to I mean, one thing to change, and as a female, you would have had more freedom if you dressed up as a man. I mean, there are lots of instances of that in literature. We know that all the way through, Victorian times and so forth, when women weren't allowed to go out unescorted, or they wore cumbersome clothes. And so it was easy to, dress up as men and go out. But that didn't have anything to do with their sexual orientation. Right. And I guess is gender fluid different than bisexual was my question.
Yes. So I think if I were bisexual, I'm probably secure in I'm probably approaching life from one gender, or, so like I'm a man, but I'm also, in terms of my sexuality and my desire, I'm engaging with both women and men. Whereas gender fluid is somebody who who their own gender is sometimes one thing or the other, or both right. At once.
Isn't that 12th night? Is that, isn't
that? Right. Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, yeah, that's there's.
I mean, but doesn't the whole Shakespeare play sort of revolve around people, taking on the other sex, to do whatever they're doing?
Yeah, and complicated somewhat, I suppose, by the fact that men would play those parts, I guess, in Shakespeare's day. And
well, there was that. Yes, I remember the OED. It was a little joke in library school that if you really read the OED, you would know that the Oxford English Dictionary, for those of you who wonder what that is, you would know what a merkin was. Which was basically it was a wig or toupee for sexual parts, so that you could, if you were really stripped down, you could look like the sex you weren't. So that was the kind of thing that passed for humor in library school.
That's my next book, The Merkin Thief.
The Merkin. Well, I mean, it's a great word if you think about it. But anyway, all right. So you've answered my question there. So good. It was, I like the fact that Clementine is 72. And here she is in a city being occupied, and so. What role is she going to play in this difficult time? We already know, that she has been a perfume thief and other things, but is the war going to, focus her on any particular role, or is she just going to try to live through it? What is it that is going to happen to her?
Well, I mean, she sees herself as having retired in Paris, and so she's had this life of crime, this intense existence, and of skirting the law and living on, the margins, both as a thief and also as a gay woman. And so, in Paris, because she moves there like around 1929 or 1930, when things were quite different than they were in 1941. So she lives there anticipating a kind of freedom that she couldn't find in America. And she's also going to open up a little shop and have a legitimate lifestyle. And so when the Nazis arrive, that complicates things, and it makes it puts elements of survival at a more urgent level, and questions of morality that she's addressed before in her life, but it take on a more you know, they take on a different kind of weight, I guess, as she's contemplating her own morality and her own sense of evaluating her life's goals and her life's values. And so she ultimately then turns her instincts towards something other than thievery, and in essence trying to take something back from the Nazis. And in this case, it ends up being these perfume recipes, and potentially the perfume industry itself.
I think it's a fascinating role to be playing. It's also, if I remember right, reading your book, a really brutal winter in 1941 Paris. And, you know, it's easy. I mean, we're not even 100 years up from that, but I don't know that we in America today realize that there wasn't a lot of the kinds of, you know, heat, indoor plumbing, all kinds of things that we take for granted was not necessarily available. So, you know, you needed a lot of calories, you needed desperately to keep warm, you know, it was like much more basic survival to be in a city in a freezing winter in 1941 under occupation, where the Germans got to scoop up the best food and, you know, the most comfortable accommodations and the whole bit. It's really, we've recently been rewatching Foyle's War, which I think, I don't know if you ever watched it, but Anthony Horowitz did a brilliant job writing about England Hastings. And he takes this policeman in Hastings, because after all, even in wartime, you still needed policemen. And he takes this through the whole war. And part of it, you know, makes you realize that life was still, by our standards today, far more primitive than we imagined. You know, they weren't that far from the Victorians. Loads of people didn't have indoor toilets or indoor plumbing. You know, they had a shed in the back of the garden. Not everybody had a telephone. A lot of people didn't have electricity, particularly out in the country. And people were hungry all the time. England in particular, because of blockades and all, because they kind of gotten out of the habit of raising their own food. And, you know, if you're cold, then being undernourished is a death threat, essentially. So, you know, you were able to, I mean, I do think it's fascinating to, you know, to write about all that, to remind us how difficult it was.
Yeah, and doing that research in 1941 and discovering that brutal winter was ended up being key to my sense of the setting as well. I really wanted it to be set firmly in that time, to layer on deprivation upon deprivation, so that the characters are really kind of pushed to the edge.
Did you enjoy spending time with these characters?
I did, and I wrote a lot more than actually ended up in the book, and so I took a lot of notes, and I could have continued writing. If I didn't have to finish the book, I'd still be writing about them, you know. So so I definitely enjoyed the world of the story for all its deprivations and all its horrors and all its brutality. There was I liked lingering in that world and putting these characters up against each other and considering the various friction and complications that would emerge.
There have been a couple of really brilliant books that written about St. Petersburg in the war, under siege. The Memory Palace is the one that I can think of most clearly. And there was another, Patrick, you'll have to help me. His name is David Benioff. I knew it would come to
Oh,
me.
sure, yeah.
And he wrote a really searing book, the name of which I cannot remember, about St. Petersburg under just unbelievably horrible conditions during the war. And I've been to St. Petersburg more than once, actually, and seeing that the Nazis came, I mean, you can right outside the city limits. They, you know, it's like 3 miles or something. Um, and how those people ever hung on and survived in Russian winters against all that, I'm never going to know.
Right, and then of course there are all those who didn't, and for
Yeah.
whom, you know, this the struggle just led to impoverishment and death and loss of loved ones, and it's incredible. I mean, it is um, fascinating and distressing and disturbing to think about the extent to which people had to navigate and negotiate their own existence while all this horror was playing out. It's one thing to imagine it for the purposes of a novel, and then a whole other thing to really have a sense of what would that have been like, pushed to that extent.
And for you to spend, you know, a fair amount of time, how long did you spend on this book? What was your writing span?
I can't really remember. I think it was I probably spent about maybe 3 years on it, and then actually, so then my editor bought it, but then she put it pretty far into the future for its pub date, and so then I had time to play around with it a little bit more, and then she had notes, and so I revised and reconfigured some of the plot details and some of the relationships that emerged, and so it was quite a long while that I was engaged with the characters.
Did you, it takes a certain amount of emotional resilience to survive over 3 years in this particular universe. You know, is it had long-term effects on you now that it's published and you can write another story, but do you think it's changed you so much to have written this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for one thing, I understand now why there are such committed fans of World War II and its history, and why people just can't get enough of it, you know, because once you go down that line, that you're just, I can't stop watching movies about World War II, and every new book that comes out, I just find so tantalizing. And so, which didn't occur to me. I mean, I honestly did not set out to write a World War II novel. And I don't think at any point, if earlier in my career, if someone had said, well, do you want to write a World War II novel? I just don't think I would have. So it was kind of something I stumbled into, really. And, but yeah, I mean, and thinking in terms of, in trying to figure out how these characters would consider their lives and how they would take into consideration the arrest of their neighbors, the disappearance of them, and this profoundly devastating reconceptualization of the city that they loved. You know, how would they reconcile themselves to all of that? And so in trying to place myself there and to get into that character, you kind of have to think about, well, how do I deal with all the bad news that I read about every day? You know, how do we go on? How do we enjoy art and beauty and food and wine and music and fashion and perfume in a world that has such deprivation, such poverty, such brutality? And so, yeah, so those questions were much on my mind in the writing of the book, and they linger still.
You know, I was born in 1940, and for many years, I congratulated myself on having missed the 1930s. I did not expect to actually live through them towards the end of my life when they're cycling around again. And I have found it to be profoundly disturbing in the sense that we don't seem to learn, you know, from history, even though we study it and all the rest of it, we seem doomed to repeat it. But how, you know, you're a professor of creative writing, so how do your students react, you know, to what you've written? If you know, now that the book is published and they can clearly read it, is this any effect in your teaching life?
Well, it's new enough, and the semester's new enough that I haven't heard too much from my students yet about their response to the book or whether they're finding their way to it. So it hasn't yet affected too much, although I do think that the book and the revising of it and the pandemic and some health issues that I had and that my husband had. I mean, all of that has affected my teaching to a certain degree. And so I have written these lectures where I've tried to articulate things that I don't know how to describe it. I mean, to just kind of like, I guess, talk about the role of our political inclinations and our personal inclinations and how all of that informs our own writing and how we bring urgency to our own writing and how we bring our own sense of self and our own morality and our own fears and anxieties and hopes and dreams to enhance the stories that we tell, even if those stories are in many ways foreign to our own personal experience. And so I think situating ourselves as writers and our own feelings and our own lives and our own world experience with those of our characters can only enhance not just the reading experience for the readers, but also the writing experience for the writers.
Well, you've written 5 earlier novels, so presumably some of your students have, and they're all different, have read those and possibly reacted to them. Do you talk to them about, where ideas come from? That's the most banal question that, authors are always asked, but nonetheless, it's asked because it's an important question.
Yeah, and and like you're talking about the writer who says that that your book should engage the senses, engage especially the olfactory senses. And I think that I agree with that. And I do writing exercises where I'll bring perfumes and spices and essences and oils to class and ask them to connect those scents to their own memories and their own sense of nostalgia, or even draw what they can creatively from the sensory. I bring Proust's Madeleines to class sometime, so we can read that passage and eat the cookie and think about our own relationship with food and so yes, I think engaging the senses is characters can come alive from getting down to that really basic emotional response and physical response to sensory awareness.
We have found over the years that inviting writers into book discussion groups is not a great thing to do because it inhibits, a really candid discussion.
Right.
People mostly still have some sense of manners, although increasingly it seems to me less. But it would seem to me for you as a professor of creative writing, when you have books that you have published and that are accessible to your students, does any of that dialogue ever come up? Did they ever say to you, so in Swan Gondola, why did you do that? Or I really didn't like it, or I loved it, or whatever?
It doesn't. And I think, to be honest, like especially in the undergraduate classrooms, a lot of them don't have any idea that I'm a writer at all. They sign up for the class and they learn about me afterwards, maybe. But they're really thinking about. They have their own favorite writers that they're emulating and that they want to talk about and they're excited about, and then they have their own writing as well. And some of them, like the really serious ones, will feel like, oh, well, I'm in the room with this guy. Maybe I can figure out what he's doing and how he can help me do whatever it is that might be done so that I can get published. And so sometimes those conversations do come up, but not as often as you might think.
No, I'm not surprised, because I remember when I was an undergraduate, I'm trying to remember when Wallace Stegner was, a giant, and he was a professor of writing at Stanford. And I never even thought about him. I was never even, moved to read one of his books, or, we had kind of a joke that John Steinbeck, which is true, failed freshman English at Stanford. And, everybody kind of knew that story, but, yeah, I can easily believe that undergraduates, they're kind of immersed in their, you know what, we're missing an opportunity here. Patrick, come and join us, because Patrick is an English major.
Right.
He probably is loving this discussion, right? So he should be talking to you more than I.
Oh, no. What would you like me to address?
Well, just if you were an English major and you were studying with a professor who'd been, publishing fiction, how would you have been moved to read it or to comment on it or indifferent to it? What?
Well, I have had that experience, and yeah, there's curiosity there. I guess it depends on how much you like the professor, and yeah, or how effective the professor is. But yeah,
But then you
certainly.
might hate read the professor's work just so you can be critical
Exactly.
of it.
Right. I'm really glad that I was in school before social media, before the internet, before all of that stuff, because it's like, boy, I kind of feel sorry for you having, it's like every moment of your, I don't know, is judged and commented on and thrown online possibly. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's like I think every writer has, especially if they're going to publish their work, they have to come to terms early on with the fact that not everyone is going to respond to their work, and
Right.
lots of readers look to books for lots of different reasons, and lots of writers write for different reasons. And the great thing about it is that there is such diversity, and so that writers can find their niche and find their readership that that actually. Leads to the opportunity to tell more stories as well. But yeah, it's there are certain corners of the internet that I do not engage with because I don't really need to hear. I
Very
don't
wise.
need,
Civil
yeah.
discourse has really taken a hit from social media. Unfortunately, the anonymity of it, does allow people their worst selves to come out.
It's
And
kind of an
it's
off top.
interesting.
Yeah, I was just going to say kind of an off topic question for you, which is how do you find yourself having kind of a love-hate relationship with the whole academia? I mean, that because that environment can be so toxic in a lot of ways, with the publisher parish sort of atmosphere, everybody protecting their little fiefdoms, and how do you
Yeah, I mean,
navigate all that?
I feel like I've been pretty lucky. I mean, I have good colleagues and good supportive colleagues, and the creative writing program that I'm in has expanded in really interesting ways. And so I feel really lucky to have the job that I have and to be able to have conversations with students about writing, and I have a lot of freedom in terms of how I approach my classes and the work that I assign, and so it's been really good for me. But I know exactly what you're talking about. I do get frustrated with academia in a larger sense sometimes, and it can feel very set in its ways and very old-fashioned, and it doesn't often feel like the heart of innovation, and and to be a writer and to be talking about writing, to be talking about the imagination in an environment that isn't entirely imaginative can be frustrating. But
So
there's
you're in Nebraska, and we had
yes.
an interesting discussion with William Ken Kruger, whom you may not know, but he's a very well-regarded crime novel. He's also written two not crime novels called This Tender Land was the last one. Brilliant guy. And when we were having our conversation for his book launch on August 23rd, I think it was, I asked him, if there was a Midwest voice, or is there, and he feels very strongly that there is. And so you're in the heartland. Would it be different if you were teaching? Can you imagine how different it would be if you were teaching, let's say, in California or Connecticut or somewhere, as opposed to Nebraska?
Yeah, I mean, the weather would be better. So,
Not in Connecticut, but
no, right.
right, California, sure.
Connecticut would be close to
Although
the
you'd probably just be on fire in
right, yeah,
California. I don't think
things
it's
are
the
tough all
paradise
over.
at the moment that we have thought of it as.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess um, I certainly read a lot of Midwestern writers, and so I think probably if I were pressed, I could come up with um, some way to articulate what those commonalities might be and what vision those writers might share. But I don't know. I mean, I think that 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 there is a sensibility, I guess, that's Midwestern, that informs Midwestern fiction, and but you would think I'd be able to articulate this a little bit better, that I would have given more thought to it in the past, and because these conversations do come up, and I do teach Midwestern writers, but I don't know, it's whereas when I was developing as a writer, and when I was reading the stuff that I really wanted to read, they were Southern writers that I was reading, and that I have a very strong sense of the region, and the writing that came from there, and I feel like if I was influenced by writers, I was really influenced by the Southern writers, but yeah, so I think that probably the Midwestern writers aren't too terribly far removed from the sensibilities of the Southern writers.
Well, it's interesting because you have the mix of course, obviously the climate and the weather, but also the history of the people who settled there, and that cultural kind of overlay. But we think of Midwesterns as hardy, kind of stoic. There are different stereotypes, I guess, based upon who settled the region. But I'm sure a lot of your students aren't from Nebraska. They're probably from all over the place.
A lot of them are from. I do have a lot of small town Nebraska students though too, and so I think that's also part of the conversation, is the small town rural experience, and as subject matter, and how that informs their work as well, and informed my work in terms of trying to create that, trying to define and navigate and explore the parameters of that experience of living in a kind of isolation like that, with influences like religion and drugs and all the particularities of all the threats and benefits of a smaller community. I think that comes into play, and it has come into play in my fiction.
My dad was born in Alliance, Nebraska, and grew up in Erie, Iowa, and then went to Northwestern, and I grew up therefore in suburban Chicago, and I've lived in other places. But if I look back on my dad, who was a wonderful man, the adjective that most often comes to me is sturdy.
Oh yeah.
To me, that's kind of a Midwestern thing. I mean, he was, you knew him, Patrick, not a lot, but I think he died the year that you came to work at the store.
I met him once or twice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was he was an All-American. I mean, literally a football All-American and all. He was a wonderful man. But I self-reliant, sturdy are kind of the adjectives that, with a very strong center, very keen sense of keen moral compass, I guess I would say. So I always think of those as Midwestern qualities. I didn't think of him as fluid. Subject we discussed earlier. I would never describe my father as fluid. No.
Are those more generational qualities as well, though?
Well, yeah. I mean,
or are they regional
he
qualities?
was born in 1914. So he was definitely a different generation than all of us. I'm a different generation than you. I mean, I'm older than your parents. Patrick. So, there's a generation gap there. Actually, one of the great things I think about the Poison Pen is our age range. I mean, I really love it, that we have, I'm the senior, but we go all the way down the line, don't we?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's great. It brings a lot of vibrancy to the bookstore. We have different tastes and different opinions. I had a longtime customer write me a sad email about, well, for various reasons, she wasn't terribly happy with us. And I wrote her back and I said, problem one is that publishing right now, there are trends. It's not publishing the kind of books you want to read. So I can't provide them for you, because they're not being written. But I said also, the store has necessarily gotten more diverse as we've gotten bigger, and we have different age ranges and different staff, and we are not so focused on the kind of niche that you once really enjoyed, and we can't give you the personalized attention that we maybe used to be able to give you. So there's some downsides to growth, aren't there, Patrick? And
Yeah.
it's harder for, but the real problem is they're just not publishing the kind of books she wants to read. And, you know, she doesn't want to go back and read the British Library crime classics and all, which is what she ought to be reading. And, you know, we've been overtaken by psychological suspense. Publishing has been overtaken to a great degree by clickbait and shock value. This whole girl on the train, you know, thing that has gone on ever since Gone Girl. And I think Timothy, is one reason I really liked your book. You know, I mean, many reasons I really liked your book. You know, your writing style is lovely, and I was fascinated with the characters. And you know, so if I love the title, as I say, even though I thought we were going to go somewhere different with it than we ended up going. But you know, it's more, I don't want to say old-fashioned storytelling, but I mean, it's not storytelling looking, as I say, for clicks, you know, for shock. And I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I mean, and I mean, I grew up loving old movies and watching them as much as I could. And so and I think that definitely informed my sensibility, and it informed my sense of what I wanted this book to be too. I mean, I really wanted to my sense of how plots work often hinge on Hitchcock and the movies of the World War II era and such. And so, and that's another thing that fascinates me as a writer too, are plot conventions, and I like playing with them. I don't want to just apply them. I want to also think about what they mean and how they're interpreted. And so, but yeah, I didn't get any pressure from my editor or from the publisher to make it flashier in a way that would be more immediately attract readers. I mean, I definitely had the space to develop the book in the way that I wanted to develop it.
No, that's wonderful. I'm delighted to hear that. Patrick, is there any question that we might want to address?
I think he's actually talked about most of it. One of them was just very interesting topic. How did you happen upon it for the book, which you talked about a bit?
Yeah.
People are talking about Foyle's War, how they like that.
I can't recommend Foyle's War enough. I just, you know, Anthony Horowitz has gone on to do all kinds of amazing stuff, but I still think Foyle's War is his finest achievement. And I also think that Michael Kitchen, who plays Foyle, is absolutely brilliantly cast. And sometimes the really successful dramas are a function of casting as much as anything else. You know, it takes the right character to really interpret in a way. And right now, in an age of streaming television, when lots of writers that we've introduced you to at the Poison Pen, Mark Rainey and Jack Carr, for example, and CJ Box and all, are all getting movies. Louise Penny, apparently, who had like the worst movie ever made of her first novel, which she hated, so I can say that, is getting a new series. And, you know, I think it's wonderful that we're able to bring novels and, you know, particularly series novels to life in a way that there are very few positives about the pandemic, but that's one, is that it has really encouraged long form storytelling and, you know, streaming television. And it's allowed us to do these things on Zoom that we probably never could have done.
Lifesavers for a lot of people, you know?
Yeah, yeah, but it's been wonderful. And we've reached an audience. We have this huge international audience now, for which we are extremely grateful. And one reason that works is because these videos live on our Facebook page forever. And people, you know, people find them, or they come there for another author and they see you and they think, you know, we'll do that. I think we're up to like 115,000 podcast downloads that we have made from these conversations. You will be one. And so it's been a way to reach readers in, you know, using these platforms, Timothy, that I wouldn't have even guessed at 2 years ago. Would you, Patrick?
No, I mean, we were doing it on a much smaller scale.
Well, we weren't doing podcasts at all, and we were certainly videoing our in-store events, but you know, but we didn't have 59,000 people watching Dennis Lane talk to Gillian Flynn, not ever, you know, so It's really been a remarkable time.
It's neat
And
too, because, as I'm monitoring the comments during many of these, I get to know people, just through the comments from all over the place.
yeah,
And
I
I get
go
a lot of
back and
people
read them after the events are over because
Yeah.
I don't do them while we're doing it. And also I don't belong to Facebook, so, or any social media platform. I do the Instagram for the store, but that's it. That's my contribution. I'm currently encouraging one of our young stack members to figure out book talk. So we'll see how that works. But there's a limit to my fluidity. The word we are overusing today. So,
Good word
Timothy,
of the
it's really been a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us and for signing The Perfume Thief. And I will remind you once again that we do have, it's a really fascinating book. We do have some autographed copies still available. And as I said, they should arrive at the store momentarily. So anyway, I hope we'll see you again. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Au revoir.
Take care.
Good night.
Night.